The headline from April 28th, so 2 weeks ago. 29-year-old woman walking with date killed after man jumps from building and lands on her. Taylor Kahle, or Kahl, Kahle, 29, was killed in a freak accident, if you want to call it that, when a suicidal man who jumped from a building landed on her as she unknowingly walked below. The decedent was an unidentified adult male who appears to be approximately 20 or 30 years old. Evening hours of April 25th, 2021. The decedent was observed entering a parking structure in downtown San Diego. He was then seen hanging from the outside railing of the 9th floor balcony of the structure. He fell to the ground and onto a passerby who was walking on the sidewalk below. So, a very pretty young lady, 29 years old, walking with her date on the sidewalk, and a jumper jumps from the ninth floor and lands on her and seemingly killed her faster than it killed him. They both died. But she was just a week away from her 30th birthday. And from what it says here, she was not married, no children, but which these days not unusual at 29 years of age. But the point is, you're out with your date on a walk, and of all places, San Diego. Okay, New York, you expect stuff to fall off of buildings in New York. That's New York, but San Diego, maybe a seagull, has a heart attack and croaks and falls on you, I suppose. But a someone committing suicide falls from the building and kills you as you're walking along. And if you're like me, the first thing you thought of was that's sort of what Jonathan Edwards was talking about in Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, is what he was basically trying to get people to realize that they're walking on a rotted bridge over the fires of hell if they are continuing in their rebellion against God, that there's nothing that is keeping them from falling into his judgment at any point in time. And it just strikes me that when we went to Germany in 2017, before the Reformation celebration, 500th anniversary, one of the things that I mentioned a number of times to our people was the fact that there was such a major worldview change since that day that it's hard for us to really understand the passion with which men and women discussed life and death and judgment. That's one of the things I liked about the BBC presentation years and years ago of Martin Luther Heretic, is they did a good job in communicating to the viewer the impact on young Luther of seeing death and the imminency of judgment. The imminency of judgment. And most of us living in the West just simply struggle with that. Now, there are people, you live under the CCP, you live in North Korea, imminency of judgment is easy for you to understand because you live under any totalitarian regime that can disappear people, that can make people just, you know that today could be it. And you don't even necessarily know why. But you know that life can be short. And you just automatically try to keep your accounts short with the people around you because it could be your day. And most of humankind has lived with that realization. It is us in the West, and only over the past less than 100 years who have sanitized our experience. You don't take children to funerals. You don't have open casket funerals. You don't discuss death. We don't discuss death in the church nearly as much as we should, and nearly realistically as we should. I've said that many times, especially when I'm talking about my book on grieving. We walk into the grieving process horribly unprepared, even as Christians. We really do. And so the whole idea of the imminency of entering into judgment is central to an understanding of how theology has been discussed in the past. Now, you then transfer the discussion of those issues into our modern context, where pretty much everybody thinks they're going to live forever. You got to remember, Luther and anyone at all in Germany at the beginning of the 16th century had all seen dead bodies on the street. They had all seen death. They had all had brothers and sisters who died in their youth. Death was around them all the time. Plague would still come by. People would be fleeing from towns to towns and fleeing into the woods. And this was what life was. And so you knew that life was short. You didn't have to really ponder Psalm 90 too often to understand why you needed to ask God to cause you to count your days so you could present a heart of wisdom to him, knowing that life is short and that there would be judgment. You look at the massive change that has taken place in the West, and the removal of the imminency of death and judgment has changed everything. If you want, in my opinion, one of the primary reasons why we're seeing the things that we're seeing today, it is the advent of a godless, man-centered, I won't necessarily say atheistic, though that's obviously part of it. I mean, there's dead religion in there, sort of mixed in. But the whole secular system, even when it tries to pretend that there's room for religion, doesn't have a creator, and therefore does not have a day of judgment. You remove the creator and you remove the day of judgment, and you have a completely different human species. You really do. You're going to have different government. You're going to have, everything's going to be different. Reasons for war, everything changes. Everything changes. And we are now seeing what that means. And so you see a situation like this, and, it's easy to go, oh, well, that's just a freak accident. No, there are no freak accidents. And the wise heart, the Christian heart, takes to heart a situation like this and goes, man, how often do I not listen to the wisdom of James? If the Lord wills, we will do such and so. If the Lord wills, we will do such and so. And mankind can't even have that wisdom now. The wisdom of mankind is there is no purpose in the future. There is no plan in the future. There's no transcendent meaning. There is no judgment. You're not created. And if a guy falls off a building on top of you, well, he fizzed his way, you fizzed yours. Now neither one of you fizzed at all. That's all there is to it. There's no more meaning to it than that. Because from their perspective, that doesn't impact anything on Saturn. And Saturn looks at our pale blue dot and could care less that you just died. Because there's nothing out there to care. This is a pitiless, random, purposeless, uncreated, massive amount of energy that's moving toward heat death. That's all there is to it. There's nothing more. Let's not worry about it. That's where we are. So with that in mind, then, when you look at the nations that are farther down the secular road, now America is seemingly running as hard as we can in our masks, which does slow us down a little bit. Hopefully we'll just pass out from lack of oxygen like that poor girl did and maybe stop for a while. But the nations that have been at this longer than we have are farther down the road than we are. And so there are places that we can look. And I'm not talking about the CCP. I mean, they're full-on totalitarian communist. That's looking at the end of the road. That's where everything points to right now. But that's the worst case scenario. I'm talking more the European nations, especially Northern European nations, because for some reason, the Scandinavian nations, Northern European nations, Belgium, Netherlands, places like that, have embraced their secularism at a higher rate of speed. Now, certainly France has as well, you know, all the way back to the French Revolution and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But when you look at what's happening in the Netherlands, you look what's happening in Belgium, and then up in the Scandinavian nations, really, you see those dead state churches with almost no regenerate people left in them at all.